So Scott, speaking of entrepreneurial, so let's talk about technology that's maybe less sexy than controlling music and sound with your or throwing trucks with your mind. So you're now our people in this room. There's a couple of organizations that you should be aware of. One of them is the Game Audio Network Guild. I think most of you have heard of them. There's also the Interactive or International Game Developers Association, which also has an audio SIG. So these are organizations that you can start to interact with in enlightened self-interest, that entrepreneurial spirit, right? And another one of them is the Interactive Audio Special Interest Group. Now, Scott, I know you're about to enter into a co-chair for the IASIG, having to do with, again, something that might be less sexy right now than throwing trucks with your mind, but it is the Web Audio API, and we would be doing you a disservice if we let you leave today without bringing this to your attention and understanding the changes that are happening with audio in browsers and tablets, and I'll let Scott sort of take it from there.
So basically the thing is that this has come up as a result of Chris Rogers at Google and Chris Wilson also at Google. And basically what they've done is they've taken an adaptive code from, they started out with the OpenAL audio engine, which some people who've dealt with game audio are reasonably familiar with, and then they have basically adapted it so that it will work inside a web browser. It is in effect open source code that generates audio inside a web browser. So the actual code that generates the audio is inside the web browser code, and then in order to be able to access that, you do so with JavaScript, basically, in order to set up, everything there. So basically the thing is that the Web Audio API uses what's called an audio context, and audio context is sort of like a canvas where you basically put all of your audio objects in. So every single kind of thing that you do inside a web page would have this audio context. And then inside the audio context are a bunch of nodes. They are just things that either will take audio input, or they will generate audio, or they will process audio. One thing to mention about the Web Audio API, because basically the thing is that right now, outside of the Web Audio API, if you wanted to do audio in a web browser currently, and not use Flash, let's just talk about that a little bit, because basically what was happening is up until about 2008 or so, everybody was using Flash on the web. And basically what happened is that Steve Jobs put a big knife through that possibility that it would ever really run on mobile devices. And everybody knows that right now mobile is the future, right? Everything's running on mobile devices, basically. So with that being said, then Apple basically 60% of the mobile market, at that time, certainly the tablet market, was going to never run Flash. So that was pretty much the writing on the wall at that point, that alternatives had to be made. And they said, okay, well, what's the alternative? That's HTML5. Well, then you try to do audio in HTML5. And the word sucks is an understatement. For composers, for sound designers, HTML5 audio sucks really bad. It's, one sound at a time. Absolutely no overlapping of sounds. Absolutely no pitch shifting of sounds. Much less any kind of filtering or anything like that. You can't pitch shift the sound, any of these kinds of things. And it's easier to set up. It takes less code, to have to do that. But in effect, the turning the web up to 11 is the one that I'm thinking about. Yeah, that's Jory's. Okay, cool. Let's do, the first one, of turning the web up to 11, yeah. So just move on forward there. Hit the space bar. Yep, keep going. So this is actually Chris Wilson's demo, and he was able to demonstrate, keep going, a vocoder inside a web browser.
407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Good enough. Cool.
Now we're engaged.
So if you understand some of the principles there, you're making a bunch of bandpass filters, and then basically you're looking at each bandpass filter for the audio that's coming in, and then basically you create a formant filter for all that sort of stuff, and then that generates, what you freakazoid robots, please report to the dance floor, right? You know, that kind of thing. So basically, except in Abraham Lincoln. So go down to the bottom, and click down to the bottom. Just click once, and hit the space bar. There you go. So he's asking why web audio. We have audio, so click that again. So right now, this is audio, and it hides the steps of the loading and the decoding and the playing. But this is what you get, is that ability. So just click that. Right, and you can't click that sound again until the other sound is finished playing. This is typical web audio, without the web audio API. So go on. So web audio provides, again, precise timings of lots of overlapping sounds. Go then. Hit the try thing. Yeah, a bunch of times. Okay. So the sound is spawning over and over and over again. It's instancing really efficiently. So there's an audio pipeline and routing system for effects and filters. Hit that. Now wait. Delay. Awesome. Okay. So you can visualize and manipulate audio data on the fly. So check that out. So you got like a visualizer. You could use that inside the game to run whatever the heck you wanted to run, right? Inside an HTML5 game. Stop that. And then you can go on the next one. Yeah. So really simple things. You can just, if you click click the rectangle again. Sorry, up the top. Yeah, the blue rectangle. Where's this play sound now?
Play sound now.
Right. But obviously, if you want to do effects and filters, you're going to have to understand a little bit of low-level knowledge of audio DSP. The nice thing is that they've made it relatively easy to understand this. For example, if you know how a filter works, filter has cutoff, filter has resonance, right? Those kinds of controls are relatively familiar to audio people. Those are the controls that are already available in the Web Audio API. So therefore, if you wanted to create a filter, you have something called a filter node, and you can run the signal into the filter node, and there, basically filter your audio.
Contextualize for a second. So this is a huge opportunity for all the audio designers interested in games in the room, because this is a new spec that's being written now, right? There's a group from the WC3 that's putting it together. The IASIG is going to have a working group on this. And Scott can talk more to the specifics, but it's a huge opportunity because, if you get involved, you can understand the spec, you can be part of what's happening with the spec, and then you can be first to the table to create cool stuff with it, because people are going to develop graphical user interfaces for it. They're going to make it a lot easier to work in. So, it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, at this point in time, the 1.0 specification is just about production ready. At this point, there's no more input into what's going to be added to the 1.0 spec, but they're definitely looking for input into the 2.0 spec. In the 1.0 spec, they now have audio input. They have MIDI input, actually. I think that may be happening through a separate thing that plugs into the Web Audio API, which is called the Web MIDI. Yes, the Web MIDI API. Yeah, it made Tom really happy, right? Exactly. So a little bit of something about what the IASIG does. I think it's a kind of a useful thing. This is a pool game that's actually done entirely with Web Audio API. So you have to click on the ball, click on the ball, just click on the ball. Hold the mouse down when you do that. Just hold the mouse down when you click on the ball. You did it? Yeah. And space bar maybe? Sorry. And hold down the space bar again. Hold it down. There you go. Release it. There you go. So if you had headphones on, you'd actually be able to hear the sounds of the balls bouncing off each other in an HRTF kind of binaural setup. This is something that FMON can't even do. They did binaural by basically filtering the sounds behind you, essentially, right? That's all they did. Cheap, of course. So the IASIG is a sort of an advocacy organization, effectively. What they do are they're organized of work groups, and Steve can fill in things that I don't know or I'm not saying specifically here, but basically they consist of a lot of work groups, and the purpose of the IASIG, as far as I've been able to determine, is that they use their user input, which is a combination of a lot of different people in the audio industry, the games audio industry, And that can be anybody from, sound designers, it can be educators, it can be people who work at Dolby Labs and stand in anechoic chambers all day, any kinds of things like that. So engineers of different kinds, whatever. So all of this input comes into these work groups at the IASIG. And what they do then is they use this input from their members in order to influence how hardware and software is going to be developed in the future. Hence the Web Audio API working group, which I'm a co-chair of. So what we're doing is we're going to be soliciting from opinions of not only people in the IASIG, but probably outside of the IASIG, so that we can get an idea of what the industry itself wants from the Web Audio API. And then basically being able to use that as input into the designers who are working on the Web Audio APIs to say, hey, if you really want to make it useful for us, you need to add X, Y, or Z, or take away X, Y, or Z, or change X, Y, or Z, any of those kinds of things. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next coming months, essentially.
All right. So any other questions from the floor? Oh, got one in the back.
So to me, this is huge. So are we transitioning to web gaming if HTML5 is?
Hold on.
No,
Yeah.
go ahead. I think he's.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that web games have been very popular for a while, right? There's a little program called Flash, which some of you may have heard of, which I was surprised to talk to. Everyone's talking about the death of Flash. Richard, I talked to him the other day and saying that in Leapfrog, they're going to start to use Flash within their games now. So because HTML5, a couple of us at the table here have seen this movie before, right? When we were talking about web gaming, we were talking about standards for the web. They're the Beatnik engine. There was a lot of ways to do it, but Flash didn't support MIDI, and there were lots of white papers written and lots of hopes that web audio would be uniform. But one of the problems is Google's pushing this, and they have their browser, and Microsoft has their browser, and then there's another browser. So getting them all to agree may not be so easy, right? But I don't think, Scott has it's a challenge.
And yeah, absolutely. Right now, we're still in the development phase in terms of adoption of the Web Audio API. But I'll say a couple of very significant things have happened at this point. It runs in pretty much all the versions of Chrome. Hang on for portable, but whatever. Basically runs in the Chrome browser. It runs now. There was a situation in which Web Audio was actually competing with another type of API that was made by Mozilla called the Audio Data API. And that has essentially collapsed. And at this point, the next major version of Firefox will have Web Audio API. So Firefox, Chrome, and now Safari, running both on mobile and on the desktop, can run the Web Audio API pretty much the same way. But what happens is there's this huge minefield of, a patchwork quilt of compatibilities. For example, everyone heard of Ogg Vorbis? Okay. So Ogg Vorbis will run on everything except, can you guess? Apple's. Right. You can't run it on any iOS device at all. It will not play an Ogg Vorbis file. So that means if you make something that's supposed to play inside mobile Safari, it cannot be an Ogg Vorbis file, which means that then you either need to have separate versions of your files so that you play Ogg Vorbis in one thing and then you don't play Ogg Vorbis on iOS or whatever.
Or you just have VLC installed inside the browser.
Right, exactly. But or you use extra JavaScripts that can actually transcode that stuff kind of on the fly effectively. So there's a few options that various people have been trying to pursue. But right now things are in their infancy. There is not one automatic panacea that where you create a game in HTML5 that it'll automatically run on every browser on every device that has a web browser. It's even on most at this point in time. Right now, probably Web Audio API runs on about 40% of what's out there at this point in time. It's really bad right now on Android at this point.
Hang on, Jim wants to say something, and then we'll take a couple more questions, and then we're going to be kicked out of here.
I would just add to that this is very much a continuation of what we saw in the console industry and still do. You had to develop a game for Xbox and you had to develop for PlayStation. They weren't compatible formats. You have competing interests, completely different hardware. They're all pushing their own thing. I wouldn't expect to see any of Google and Apple and Microsoft get together and agree on a set of standards. It's not in their interest to do so, and the business is thriving. So there's always going to be multiple versions going out. I mean, it's great to have software formats that are agnostic, that can run on as many things as possible.
And the web audio will run on most of the devices. Just that what file is going to be played will be different.
Yeah, and that's where middleware comes in. I mean, Unity will do that. Or FMOB will do that. You put in an uncompressed wave, and then you build it for that specific format for that platform.
I was wondering if in the future we will maybe have some kind of online plugin that can be run web-based, so you can just run your stream of audio and let somewhere else have the calculation and all the power and still.
Absolutely. I mean, I definitely think that if someone wants to be entrepreneurial, this is the time to develop some middleware that runs in Web Audio API so that people can actually use it. And here's another thing, and I always tell this to everybody, you can tell this to other people. The code that's in Web Audio API is actually open source and can be freely pulled out of the WebKit nightly builds. If you have a programmer who's reasonably savvy, they could literally take out that whole thing and have an engine, a sound engine. And if they were reasonably savvy, they could figure out a way of porting that directly native to iOS, Android, Mac PC, whatever.
Nice.
Anyway.
Question in the back.
Quickly, where does publishing come in the gaming world? And a lot of it seems to be for hire, but your experiences as far as publishing?
And when you're talking about publishing, you're specifically
songs.
Oh,
and
music. Yeah, music licensing. Do you want to?
Yes.
One of you guys want to take it, or? There's lots of songs are being used in games, right? We're hearing them all the time. There's a a movement in games to actually let people play the engines that actually allow you to put your own iPod, iTunes playlist into games.
The old GTA allowed you.
Exactly, and they built an algorithm so that you can use your own music, right? And they built a little music engine that just takes your files and uses them within the game. This is the problem with it is that there aren't the same royalty models in games that there are in, let's say, broadcast TV, right? So if you really want to license your songs, right, you're probably going to be looking at trying to get your cut on the next episode of the OC or Grey's Anatomy or something like that, because every time it plays, you're going to get a back-end royalty from that, right? That doesn't really exist in games. I mean, that's why when we watch TV now, I swear, sometimes if I don't look at the television, it sounds like someone has the radio on in the background of these shows, right? And that's what music supervision, has pushed towards broadcast. So we see a lot of the same movements, and there are possibilities to get songs in, but a lot of times, the unless you have a super popular song, I mean, we see it with sports games a lot, right? With NBA games and with football, you'll see songs that are placed, and fees are being paid for those. But the placement sometimes can be a little. There's a lot of bands that would or a lot of groups and a lot of musicians who would like to get their songs into games, right? So a lot of times the offer is like, we'll get your song into the game, it'll make you famous, And so a lot of times there's not a lot of money paid, but there's a lot of profile. So there's also, in-game advertising, all this stuff. I think I think it's coming, along, and it's already here, and we'll see more and more of it. I don't know if you guys want to address it. I mean, have you ever? Has it come up on a title that you've worked on over the years, in terms of song placement over?
The question always comes up, or, often comes up. And I guess the two things I'd add to that are, in general, what I've seen is that like Steve said, the royalty mechanism that exists in broadcast media and in record sales and stuff like that is just not there in games. It's still in that sense a very emerging industry, and just very different. And people have been trying to get it more in line with how film and record publishing works, but I frankly don't see it going that way because the game publishing is its own thing, and the tendency tends to be that the publishers want to own everything, unless you are very famous already. Then, yeah, we want Jay-Z's song or Jane's Addiction or whatever. It's like, and we'll pay good money for that. Oftentimes, though, that's one time. That's just a chunk of money. They're still not getting residuals, on it. Yeah, in terms of that question, coming up, it's they always want that,
Yeah.
but then it comes down to, well, how much is it worth, really paying for,
I actually had a question about that. Just recently we saw Austin Wintory come up for the whole Grammy thing, and so you see this convergence there between games and the traditional publishing industry. And so I'm sort of curious, how that side of things works, if he was bought out for that, or is he now getting residuals on it? Yeah.
I mean, okay, so you guys know how this works. This is like a little one-on-one. Okay, TV, you get royalty back end. It's pretty much the only thing that's left in the United States that you'll see royalty back end from. Films never had royalty back end, because when ASCAP was getting started, the film industry said, we're not going to pay you guys a dime. In fact, we're going to stop ASCAP from being created as an organization unless you make us exempt. Okay, fine. So they got their way because they were able to do that. Internationally, you'll be paid for film, right? If your film plays overseas, you'll get royalty money. In the game industry, there's never been a royalty back-end stream in terms of plays, because look at the debate that they're having over digital downloads. I mean, are you going to be paid for a song that plays, that you stream versus, and what's that worse versus a song that you download? Well, I downloaded it, so it's not worth the royalty, but if it streams, it's worth the royalty. So it's a big old can of worms, and it's a big mess. But I'll put a positive spin on this, which is, again, getting back to the entrepreneurial side. So a couple of years ago, I went out and I spoke at the CMJ conference, right? And it was the discussion about games and music and how that was. There were two guys on the panel, and their whole thing was they make games for bands. And they were like, we never sit down and listen to music by itself. We can't even imagine. Music is always tied to an interactive experience for us. And in like our generation, this is what we want to do. And that was a revelation for me. I'm like, because I like to have time to sit and listen to music without staring at a screen. But this is, you've seen this now. You've seen, I think Green Day had a game. There's a lot of possibilities for creating apps that have your music in it. Right, and these can easily go onto the iPad or onto Android devices, and it's a way for you to sort of disseminate your music entrepreneurially on your own. So it's just a kind of a positive spin on that, is that it's that double-edged sort of that we've been talking about, sort of been the thread through today, is that changeover to non-physical media. When we go all digital, how does that look, and how do people get paid, and how do our songs, have we sort of answered your question? Okay, great. I think how are we doing? We got more questions, can we stay, or? Okay, we will take 3 more questions, and we'll start. Do we want to? No, go ahead. Go ahead, Brandon.
I just had more of a comment.
Yeah.
That, kind of a famous example of royalties with gaming was GoldenEye. I think he was a French composer who wrote the James Bond theme. When Grant Kirkhope was using his theme in GoldenEye, as they were selling the game cartridges, the original composer got 50 cents per cartridge sold, and it was 2.5 million cartridges sold.
Right.
So he got $5 million.
Yeah, but that's an individual deal that he had to make ahead of time with the company, and try and get a company to do that. If you're unknown, that's very hard. It's cool if you can do it, though.
But again, the reason he was able to do that and strike that deal was because he already had that tune, which was very well known in a blockbuster movie, and it was worth it to the game development company to quote that in there. So it's kind of the same thing. That was his hit, and so he had leverage. So if you've got that, or if you're Justin Bieber and you've got the hit of the month, then yeah, somebody's going to come after you and say, yeah, we want to use you.
Yeah, totally. We had another question? Yes. You need a microphone. They're coming. He's coming. This is like Oprah. Under your seats, everybody has it. No, okay.
So I had a question. I worked on the Disney Bolt video game, and the
Cool.
person that was after the 11th level, he was kind of bored with his music, and he called me in, and I kind of iced the cake for like 3 levels to change it up and work with Stylus RMX and a few other plugins. And I'm wondering, I didn't get credit on the box, and I didn't get credit in general. But they always say you need a game credit before you can get in the industry, and I've done a few of these things. How do I? Is there a formula? Can I put it on my resume anyway? Because I really did do the work.
Absolutely.
I don't have a credit though.
Look, the game industry, it's yeah.
I've worked on so many things that either they misspelled my name or they just didn't put me on there. Yeah, but you just don't lie and be able to back it up, and if you have references like the people at Disney, who-
Definitely references and the Excel sheets and all those things from the
Absolutely.
actual.
I mean, that's work that you did, so you let everybody know about it.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, game industry is notorious for not crediting people. It's one of the shameful, sins. Secrets of the dirty little secrets of the industry is that people have worked and I can't think of any other industry that employs creative artists that does not give them credit, that does not say
pretty much just work for hire and see you later, thank you, bye.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Did we have one last question?
How much of your job have you learned on the job? This goes to all of you.
Wow, that's a good one. By now, in all of my years, a lot. I mean, I had the basic foundation in music and in a certain amount of programming that allowed me to get in and understand how program languages worked and help me with scripting and stuff like that. But particularly with sound design, I hadn't done any really formal sound design before I started working in games. Just kind of went into it because it was there, just kind of like you. Mm-hmm. I'd done abstract music, which was kind of sound designy, electronic stuff and all of that. So yeah, I mean, by now it's kind of my whole skill set is part and parcel of my experience, doing games for 20 years. Absolutely. And I think just the more you do it, that happens with a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that I learned a lot of my job on the job, especially considering my job changed so dramatically while I was doing it. But at the same time, I've always been very. It's always been very important to me to have outside influences that kind of bring to bear on my job. I think that the valuable things that I've learned in my job are very much on the organizational side of things, on being able to keep all these assets in check, which it's a huge undertaking. The craft of composing and doing sound design, the kind of way to approach it so that your workflow is efficient and you can turn things around in the time that you need to. From an aesthetic standpoint, I think that a lot of what I do outside of my job sort of brings to bear on that. So I compose a lot of chamber music, I do dance, I do film, lots and lots of different things. I try to expose myself as much as I can. I try to expose myself to as much different stuff that's out there that can then inform, the music that I do write when I've got a 2-day turnaround to kind of deal with and give it that shine and sparkle that it might not otherwise have because I'm so in the trenches. So I think and I think both play off each other really, really well. To the extent that when I'm doing my stuff outside of work, my organization of that stuff is much better than it otherwise would have been because of my job. So, it's sort of a continuum, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. Would say that I've definitely learned a lot of things on the job. I had a lot of tool sets of my own, like being a geek and being a bit of a hacker and that sort of stuff, and just being really stubborn and, trying to figure things out and beating my head against a wall sometimes when the stupid script doesn't work yet again. But also, I didn't know all that much about game audio before I started this thing, and I just dove into it, watched about 1 billion playthroughs, hung around people when they would mention awesome games that they loved. I would go watch the game. If I had an ability to play it, I might try to play it, or something like that. But definitely learned the majority of my stuff certainly on the job. I did do one significant sort of like game-like thing where I worked on an interactive media project, and yeah, I can understand that whole thing about workflow. I had to basically create all the sounds for this website, which was consisting of like 7 different cutscenes plus a bunch of different small games, and I had to make sound effects for the whole thing plus music yeah, I had to basically create all these complex sound effects from scratch and then figure out how to organize them and then implement them and tie the game in so that I give them to people and stuff like that. So yeah, you become really good at trying to figure out how you can go faster and faster and be a little more efficient with what you're doing, for sure.
So great. I mean, if you want to hear, for me, it's all on the. I agree with all of these guys. If you want to hear my story, I can tell you my own stories. It's all pretty much all on the job training. I graduated from, I went to Cal Arts, I got out and I thought I would just make weird music and die poor. And then I came to the Bay Area and I met a gentleman at the Café du Nord who became a very good friend of mine, who still is to this day, who looked at me and said, "Do you want to make your living writing music for games?" And I was like, "No, I never thought about that." Screaming at him over the music while it was playing. And he's like, "Okay." And then the next thing I knew, I was making my living writing music for games. And doing sound for games. So, this has been, I hope this has been valuable for you guys. It's been a great night for us, and I'd really like to thank Jim and Richard and especially Scott. Thank you guys for being here, and thanks to Pyramind for having us, and you guys are awesome.
Thank you.